All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Let's thank our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Yoel and Sarah Kelman, in honor of the birth of their daughter, Oria Tahel, and in the hopes that all those davening for the bracha of children will have their tefillos answered b'karov. To thank Stephen Tarizin for dedicating all the Shurman Drushos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Adin Smi and Naftali Moshe. Shirley Elbaum and family for dedicating the Shiurim and Drushos this month, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Shirley's husband, Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Koppel ben Ram Menachem. And our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's sister, Leah Bas Shmuel. And our Daf Yomi sponsors, Alan and Sue Meyerowitz, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Sue's mother, Mindel Bas Reb Shlomo Todris. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamos will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Dalid. We are picking up on Gimel Amud Beis 3b. But let's just pick up 14 lines down from the top. It's too many lines to count up from the bottom. 14 lines down from the top. So let's remember, we ended off yesterday, but today we're going to catch up in Mir Hashem. So we ended off yesterday with an interesting discussion kind of about creating halachic hierarchies. You know, if you have a conflict between two mitzvos, so which one should one perform? So we're picking up now. We just pick up 2 lines earlier. Amar Rava Pshitali, Avodo Mikra Megillah Adif. Rava says if you have a conflict, right, if you have a choice between Mikra Megillah and Avoda, sacrificial service, Mikra Megillah wins. From where do I know that? Says the Gemara. Midrab Yossi Bar Chanina. From Yossi Bar Chanina, both say, so that's yesterday's daf, where we saw the Kal V'chomer, that if Mikra Megillah is strong enough to trump Avoda, where do we learn that from? Mishpacha u'mishpacha, then of course, again, it's strong enough to trump Talmud Torah as well. Good. Talmud Torah, Mikra Megillah. So we'll say if there is a choice between Talmud Torah and Mikra Megillah, which one wins? So the Gemara says, Mikra Megillah, Adif, Midisam Chushal Beis Rebbe. Good. Talmud Torah, Meis Mitzvah. So we'll say that's all yesterday's daf. Interesting case now. What about Talmud Torah, Mikra Megillah? And I will say, now remember again, as we saw in Tosas yesterday, Tosas is talking about the goal, of course, is to be able to do all of these things. The Gemara is just trying to deal in a more extreme situation where there's a direct conflict and only ability to perform one at a given time. Which one takes precedence? So Talmud Torah, Meis Mitzvah. So what happens if there's a conflict between Torah learning, Talmud Torah, and Meis Mitzvah? But say Meis Mitzvah refers to someone who has died, and there's no one else to bury that individual. That is called a Meis Mitzvah. So what's Talacha Talmud Torah Meis Mitzvah? Meis Mitzvah Adif. In that case, the Meis Mitzvah takes precedence. So we'll say this is very interesting. So Meis Mitzvah, someone who passed away, there's no one else to bury them. Meis Mitzvah will take precedence over Talmud Torah. Midisanya, as we learned, Mevatlin Talmud Torah, Lahotzas, Meis, Ulachnasas Kala. So the Gemara says, we go ahead and we negate the study of Torah. So in other words, Mevatlin Talmud Torah means we'll cancel the shir, close the base medrash. Lahotzas Meis, in order to bury the dead, Ulachnasas Kala. And in order to go ahead and marry off a kala. Now, both say, hachnosas kala could mean a couple of things. Hachnosas kala could mean gathering the money in order to allow someone to get married. Hachnosas kala could also mean assembling the minyan in order for someone to get married. All right, so the Gemara says, I'll just point out, by the way, Tosas just points out by Meis Mitzvah, that it's lav dafka Meis Mitzvah, that's mevatel Talmud Torah. He says anytime there's the need to bury the dead, right? And you're needed for that. You're needed for that process. Ultimately, again, that process will trump Talmud Torah. That's okay, but fine, a detail. Next, avoda Meis Mitzvah. What happens if there's a conflict between avoda and Meis Mitzvah? Meis Mitzvah adif. Ultimately, again, Meis Mitzvah takes precedence. Where do we learn this from? Mevala'achoso. So we'll say this is fascinating. So what's the drasha of Vala'achoso? So let's first take a look in the Gemara. Disanya. Ula'achoso Ma Talmud Lomar. So we'll say, what's the context over here? So the pasuk says, La'aviv ulimo ula'achoso lo yitama lahem b'mosam ki nezer elokav al rosho. So we'll say, this pasuk is talking about a nazir. About a nazir. So the Torah says that if a person is a nazir, for his father, his mother, his brother, his sister, he shall not become tamei. So we'll say, in this respect, interestingly enough, the nazir is treated like the Kohen Gadol. The same way that a Kohen Gadol does not become tamei, even for immediate relatives, neither does the nazir. Neither does the nazir. Now both say, take a look at Rashi very quickly. Ula acho, so it's the second short line in Rashi. Very important Rashi. Rashi says, Ula acho, so matam lomar, kabe nazir ksiv, al nefesh meis lo yavo. So the Torah says that a nazir is not permitted to become tamei. Hare akol b'mashma. So we'll say, so just think about this just a moment. The Torah says by a nazir, al kol nefesh meis lo yavo. Now with that phrase by itself, I would say, whose levaya is a nazir permitted to attend? Whose levaya is permitted to attend? No one's. Right? Torah says you can't become tamei. Yet the Torah still feels compelled. Hadr ksiv basrei kra yisera laviv ulimo la'achiv olachoso. So we'll say, even when the Torah makes a statement, a nazir can't become tamei, which bepashtos means he can't become tamei for anyone, the Torah still feels compelled to go back and say, by the way, for his father, his mother, his brother, his sister, he can't become tamei. So it's redundant. So we'll say, so the Gemara understands that the redundancy is there to teach us a very important drasha. Listen to this. So I'm reading Rashi. Darash Sifri, La'aviv lo yitama. What does it mean when it says for his father he can't become tamei? Aval metamihu lemeis mitzvah. So I will say, his father teaches me, for his father he can't become tamei. But for a meis mitzvah, even a nazir is permitted to become tamei. Le'imo, ma Talmud Lomer. What do I learn out from a mother? So the Gemara says, Shem haya kohen v'nazir aval pisha kadosh beis kedushos. Le'imo lo yitama. From Imo Rabbosai, I learned that, let's say, for example, this Nazir also happens to be the Kohen Gadol, in which case he has two Kedushos, two levels of sanctification. So for his mother, he can't become Tamei, but for a Meis Mitzvah, he can become Tamei. La'achiv lo yitama, aval metami lemeis mitzvah. Da'akarchach kulu lemeute meis mitzvah. Asu. So we'll say, the point is, Aviv, Imo, Achiv, all come to teach me that no matter what his level of sanctification, he is permitted to become tamei for a meis mitzvah. Therefore the Gemara says, what do I do with la'achoso? So I will say, so again, I have drushes for Aviv, Imo, Achiv. What about achoso? Back to the Gemara. This is incredible. So the Gemara says, this sanyo, ula'achoso ma Talmud lomar. What do I learn from the word la'achoso? Harishaya lishchot es pischo, v'lamul es bino. Let's say a person is going to shecht his Karban Pesach, or a person is going to circumcise his son. So a person is engaged in the performance of a mitzvah, v'shama shemes lo meis. And now I heard that what? Now I heard that someone passed away. Someone passed away, or someone in my family passed away. Yachol yitama. You might have thought that you should become tamei. And I will say this is most acute in Karban Pesach. Let's say, again, I'm going to do Karban Pesach and I hear that one of my close family members passed away. So here's my choice, right? What's my choice? My choice is I can go back to the Levaya, and then what happens? No more Karban Pesach, right? Because you can't do Karban Pesach when you're in a state of ritual impurity. Or I could continue on in my Karban Pesach. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Amrit lo yitama. Therefore, the pasuk says, Rabbosai, that if it's a choice ultimately between attending the Levaya of a close relative or doing Karban Pesach, ultimately I continue on in Karban Pesach. Now, that is assuming that halacha lemaisa, there is someone else to bury the dead. So assuming that there's someone else to bury the dead, and now again I can continue with my Karban Pesach. By the way, the reason we're bringing up, Tosas brings up, they are bringing up both Pesach and Bris Milah is because both of these have a chi of kares for non-performance. So therefore, again, as long as there's someone else to bury the dead, I continue on in my mitzvah. So you might have thought the same thing applies to a meis mitzvah. Let's say I'm on the way to do my Karban Pesach, or I'm on the way to give a bris milah to my son. You might have thought the same way that I don't turn back for the levaya of a relative, I also don't turn back for the levaya of a meis mitzvah. Talmud Lomar, the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, la'achoso. Ula'achosohu de'ena matame, ava matame lemeis mitzvah. Therefore, both say the pasuk says ula'achoso. It is only for a relative. It is only for a relative that I don't have to turn back if there's someone else to bury them. But for a meis mitzvah, I absolutely would go ahead and turn back. Now, both say, and I want to point out, a relative could also be a meis mitzvah, right? How could it be a relative be a meis mitzvah? Right? I'm the only one. So remember again, relative and meis mitzvah are not exclusive. Meis mitzvah is a reality where there's no one else to oversee the burial except for me. So from the achos, so I learned that if I'm on my way, I'm not a Nazir, I'm not a Kohen, I'm just a Pashat Yid who's on the way to do the Karban Pesach or on the way to do Bris Milah, and now I hear someone died, someone, a close relative of mine died. So again, I have a choice. I could go back and lose out the opportunity to do the mitzvah, bury the dead, or continue on. So the Gemara says it depends. If there's someone else to take care of the burial, continue on. If there's not someone else to continue on the burial, that's a meis mitzvah, turn back. Incredible. So by Rava, supposed to say, continuing in the hierarchy, by Rava, Mikra Megillah Umeis Mitzvah, Himinai Adif. It's an interesting case. So now both say, what happens if you pit the two strongest mitzvos against each other right now? Mikra Megillah, so we've already established in the hierarchy, Mikra Megillah trumps Avoda, trumps Talmud Torah, and now you have Meis Mitzvah. What happens? There's a conflict between Mikra Megillah and Meis Mitzvah, says the Gemara. So Heminai Adif, which one is more important? Or which one takes precedence? Not really important. Which one takes precedence? Mikra Megillah Adif Mishum Pirsumei Nisa. Do we say the reading of the Megillah takes precedence because there's Pirsumei Nisa, there's a certain publicity that is associated with Mikra Megillah? O Dilma Meis Mitzvah Adif Mishum Kavod Habrios. Or maybe Meis Mitzvah is more important. Why? Because of Kavod Habrios. Because of human dignity. So which one takes precedence? Basar Debaya Hadar Pashte, after he asked it, it was answered, Meis Mitzvah Adif. Both say if there's a conflict between Mikra Megillah and Meis Mitzvah, Meis Mitzvah takes precedence. Why? The Gemara says, the Amar Mar Gadol Kavod Habrios Shedocha Eslo Sase Shebatorah. Kavod Habrios, human dignity, is so powerful that it even has the ability to set aside a biblical prohibition. And I will say, which biblical prohibition does Kavod Habrios set aside? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Es lo saseh, dichsiv lo sucha lis alim. It's very interesting. I will say the halacha is, if you see a lost object lying on the ground, you have an obligation to go ahead and pick it up and try to find the owner. And there's a biblical prohibition of lo sucha lihis alim. You are not permitted to go ahead and look away. Now, there's an exception to that rule, Rashi says. There is an exception to that rule. The exception to that rule is, let's say the particular lost object is beneath the dignity of the finder to retrieve it and pick it up. Let's say a Talmid Chacham is walking and he finds a sock. So, bepashtos, it's not the right kavod to the Talmid Chacham to pick up the sock and try to go ahead and find the owner of the sock. In that case, one is permitted not to go ahead and retrieve the lost item. So you see over here, why? Because it would be an affront to the dignity of the Talmid Chacham to pick up such a Metzia, to pick up such a lost object. So you see from here, Gadol Kavod Habrios, look how great Kavod Habrios is, that it's docha elo sase. Even though the Torah says you're not allowed to go ahead and look away, the Torah says again, when it's a conflict with human dignity, you're permitted to. Therefore, as great as the reading of the Megillah is, when there's a conflict between Mikra Megillah and Meis Mitzvah, ultimately again, Meis Mitzvah. And Zerah says incredible because actually in Smichas Chaver, this past Monday night, we just spoke about Kavod Habrios. We just literally did this topic of Kavod Habrios and how on Hilchos Shabbos, Kavod Habrios sets aside D'Rabbanan. Mamish just had this sugya. Incredible. Says the Gemara Gufa. So we'll say, let's analyze. Amr Rabbi Shimon Levi. We had this 2 days ago. Yesterday. Krach v'chala samuch lo v'chala nira imo nidon kikrach. So we'll say we learned an interesting halacha that walled cities, right? Read on the 15th, and not only that, any city that could see a walled city, right? And any city that is next to a walled city has the status of a walled city. Has status of walled city. Both say, so by the way, just like to illustrate this, I think in an interesting way. I don't know what the halacha is. I was thinking about this. That if when you drive out of Yerushalayim, Mevaseret Sion is perched on a hilltop, right? And literally, again, you can see just the topography is such that you can see Yerushalayim from Mevaseret. So that's an interesting case. I don't know halacha l'maisa what they do there on Purim, but again, any city that could see Yerushalayim or any walled city or is close to the Gemara. So let's analyze this case. So it says the Gemara Tana Samach Afabisha Einonira Nira Afabisha Samach. And by the way, so the Brisa says if it's close, even if it can't be seen, or if it can be seen, even if it's not close, it still has the status of a walled city. So let's analyze. Bishlam Nira Afabisha Samach. So I understand the case of a city that could see a walled city, even though it's not close. So we'll say, for example, if you have a walled city that's perched on top of a mountain, right? So you could go ahead and you could see the walled city, even though what? You're very far away. Rabbi will say, how do you ever have a case of a walled city that is in close proximity but yet can't be seen? Very simple. Is situated in a valley. So you could have a situation where the walled city is geographically close, but it can't be seen because it is situated in the valley. V'amr Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, we'll see another interesting case. Krach sheyashav ulubasof hokaf nidon kikfar. We'll say, watch this. Now we're going to begin to get into the definition of a walled city. And the definition of a walled city is a city that was walled before it was inhabited. But if the city was first inhabited and then the wall was added later on, that city does not have the status of a walled city. That has the status, literally, kfar means a village, but has the status of an unwalled city. So the wall has to precede habitation. My time, what's the reason for this? Says the Gemara. What was the deal of Rashi, by the way? Sheyashav ulubasof hokaf, shenesyashev tchila bebatim, ulubasof hokaf choma, nidon kikfar le'inyan bate are choma. So we'll say, here it happens to be, the Rashi says, we're talking about the topic of bate are choma. Of bate are choma, we'll say, means homes, there are halachos that legislate real estate transactions in Eretz Yisrael. So for example, if you sell a home in a walled city, you have up to 1 year to redeem that purchase. If you do not redeem that purchase in 1 year, that purchase is irrevocable. In other words, it doesn't even revert back to the original owners at Yovel. The Sefer HaChinuch explains the reason for that is because walled cities were often border cities and were the first line of security in Eretz Yisrael. In order for the security of the city to work, the inhabitants have to know the city and the inhabitants have to know each other. You can't have homes constantly changing hands in walled cities. Therefore, the Sefer HaChinuch says, you sell a home in a walled city, you have 1 year to redeem it. If you don't redeem it in that 1 year, that's it. It's not going back we can't have stuff going back and forth every 50 years. It's sold what we call lechalutin, in an irrevocable sale. So the Gemara says, so Rashi says, therefore, what's the definition of a walled city? A city that had a wall first and habitation afterwards. So my time at Dichsiv, v'ish ki yimkar beis moshav ir choma. If a person will sell a beis moshav ir choma. So the Gemara says, beis moshav shel ir choma. The way we read it is a city that was inhabited in a city that has a wall. So the indication is that ultimately, again, it is the wall that was there prior to the habitation. Shehukaf ulubasof yashav, v'lo sheyashav ulubasof hukaf. It has to be that it was walled first and then inhabited, and not inhabited first and then walled. Interesting. From Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, also listen to this. Krach she'ein ba asara batlanin nidon kikfar. So listen to this, Rabbi say. If you have a city that doesn't have asara batlanim, right? Now, Rabbi say. Now, remember again, when we speak about a krach, right? So krach normally refers to a walled city, right? Here in this case, it refers to a large city as well. What's the definition of a large city? One that has asara batlanim. So we'll say, that's okay, that's great. Every city has asara batlanim, right? At least asara batlanim. Right? So we'll say, in this case, batlanim is not a disparaging term, right? In this case, batlanim actually means something different. Look at Rashi. Asara batlanim, shebetelin mimalachton. These are 10 individuals who don't have outside work. Rather, what's their occupation? So the Gemara says, Shiyu mitsuyin tamid bebeis hakneses shachris ve'arvis. These are 10 people whose job it is to make sure there is always a minyan in shul. That's their occupation. Asara batlanim. They make sure there's always a minyan in the morning and in the evening. Because the Gemara says the Ribono Shel Olam on one hand is overjoyed when he comes, quote unquote, and there is a minyan, and is dismayed when there is not a minyan. So the function of a larger city is that, now obviously I will say, if these guys aren't working, what does that mean? What does that mean? Right? Someone supporting them, right? So therefore, again, interestingly enough, the kind of like the way we see if a city is a larger city is, do they have the ability to support asara batlanim? So krach sheyesh ba asara batlanim nidon kikfar. I'm sorry, krach she'in ba asara batlanim nidon kikfar. So therefore, a city that doesn't have 10 batlanim is like a village. My kamash malon tanida ezuhi ir gedola kol sheyesh ba asara batlanim. What's the definition of a large city? Any city that has 10 batlanim, pachos mikan, less than this, harei zekfar. Ultimately, again, it's a village. To which the Gemara says the reason why we need this is as follows. Krach itzrich le, afagav de mikloi le me alma. Supposed to listen to this. See, here's the difference. You could have a krach, which is a large walled city, and I both say you might have at any given time, because it could be a center point, many individuals frequenting this city. Therefore, it's quite possible that at any given time there are always 10 people in shul. The Gemara says, no, that's not what makes a large city large. It has to be 10 people who are on the payroll of the city, whose job it is, who are designated to go ahead and make sure that there is a minyan in the shul. The fact that incidentally, right, there may be people who are always around, that does not create the asara batlanim dynamic. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Amr Shimon Levi, listen to this. Krach shecharav ulubasof yashav nidon kikrach. Supposed to listen to this. If you have a walled city that was destroyed and subsequently inhabited, it has the status of a walled city. Okay, what does that mean? So my charav, what does it mean it was destroyed? Ilema charvu chamosav yashav in lo yashav lo. So if you want to say that the case we're dealing with over here is that the walls were destroyed, and what you're telling me is if the walls were destroyed and then rebuilt, it regains its status of a walled city. Well, v'hatanya, we learned, Rabbi Elazar bar Yossi Omer, asher lo choma, afa pi she'ein lo choma achsha v'hayu lo kodim lachin. Well, say, remember again, we've learned in general when you come to the halachos of walled cities, that halacha lemaisa, that in order to be considered a walled city, you don't necessarily have to have your wall presently. You just have to have had it at some particular pivotal time. Shabbos say, he's talking over about walled cities, about like real estate walled cities. But the truth thing about this by Mikra Megillah. What's the definition of a walled city by Mikra Megillah? For Megillah purpose, what's the definition of a walled city? What's the definition? It had a city, it was Machlokes, right? It's at the time of Yoshua, time of Achashverosh. But what's clear is, in order to be considered a walled city, it doesn't have to have its wall in perpetuity. Right? It just has to have had its wall at one significant point historically. So obviously, again, a city could be a walled city, even if presently it doesn't have a wall. To which the Gemara says, Elamai charav, what does it mean charav? Shecharav me'asara batlanim. What it means to say is as follows, that if you have a city that had asara batlanim, right, and therefore was considered to be a large city, and therefore at some point lost its 10 batlanim, right, lost its status as a large city. And then what happened? It regained its asara batlanim. It has the ability to regain its former status. Okay, with all of the implications of that. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, top of Dalit, Lud, Va'ono, V'gaya Harashim, Mukafos, Choma, Mimos, Yeshua, Ben Nun. So Mosai comes along, Rabbi Shimon Levi, and says, by the way, I want to tell you about certain cities which were walled historically. So Lud, Ono, Gaya Harashim, these are all cities which were walled from the times of Yoshua ben Nun, and therefore halacha l'maisa, they read on the 15th like any walled city. So the Gemara says, really? V'hani Yoshua banani, is that true? Yoshua was the one who quote unquote built these cities? Or they were walled at his time? V'ha al pa'el bananhi. So we have on record that in fact these cities were actually not really walled, were not built until later on in history. They were built by a man by the name of Al Pa'el D'chsiv Ubnei Al Pa'el Ever Umisham V'Shemed Hu Bana Es Ono Ve'es Lud Ve'es Benoseha. Shabbos says, so the pasuk seems to indicate that, oh yes, we'll agree the cities are walled, but they were walled later on in history, after the times of Yoshua ben Nun. Ulatamech, and according to this logic, Asa banani, was it Al Pa'el? It was in fact Asa. Dichsiv vayiven asas aria b'tzuras asher liYehuda. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar, Hani mukavas cholim Yoshua ben Nun havu. What really, these cities were all walled in the times of Yoshua. So the Gemara says, however, what happened? So, Hani mukavas cholim Yoshua ben Nun havu. Charuv bimei pilegesh begiva. So then the walls of these cities were destroyed during the episode of the Pilegesh Begiva. Remember again, we just had this at the end of Tainus by Tu B'Av, right? One of the reasons for the Simcha of Tu B'Av is that Shevet Binyamin was permitted to remarry or to re-enter into the union of the Shvatim. Why were they kicked out? Because of the whole episode by Pilegesh Begiva. So the walls of these cities were destroyed during this episode. Va'asa El Pa'el Banani. El Pahel came along and he rebuilt them. Hadar Inpol, then they fell down again. Asa Shapatzinu, and Asa came along and repaired the walls. Dekanami Dichse Vayomer Yehuda Nivna Esa Arima'ila Michlal Da'arim Havu Me'ikar Shmaminas. There will say, interestingly enough, a very interesting history lesson. Lud, Ono, Gaya Harashim were originally walled during the times of Yoshua. The walls of these cities were destroyed during the episode of Pilegesh Begiva. El Pa'el rebuilt them. They subsequently fell into a state of disrepair, and Asa made the repairs. Okay, but I will say, but again, what you begin to see just is a fantastic illustration of the fact that the definition of a walled city is, as we said before, all you need was to have had a wall at a particular historical juncture. If you had the wall then, you're in. Even if subsequently your wall fell into disrepair, you don't have a wall at all, halach l'maaseh, you're in. Incredible. So I'll say, says the Gemara. I'll just point out, by the way, what's another fascinating thing is we know that halach l'maaseh, even in Eretz Yisrael, right? In other words, which cities are walled cities are not necessarily things for which you have historic. In other words, I'll give you a good example. Getting a little ahead. Even which cities are walled cities are not necessarily things for which we have accurate historical record. For example, a number of years ago, they discovered a wall around the city of Hebron that goes ahead and dates back to prior to the times of Yoshua ben Nun. So amazingly enough, Hebron was reading as an unwalled city. I believe now they observe both days of Purim in Hebron because of the discovery of the wall. So I'm just pointing out, it's fascinating. You're talking about knowing if you're a walled city at the times of Yoshua ben Nun or not. Some of that information is still being discovered contemporarily. Quite amazing. I will say, fantastic. So, Rabbi Shimon Levi, Nashim chayavos b'mikra Megillah. Women are obligated in Mikra Megillah. Sha'af hein hayu ba'osa hanes. Because they were also included in the miracle. Now, I will say, this is a fascinating sugya for which we do not have sufficient, if I have any chance of catching up with the daf. So we can't go into it too much, but I just want to show you a couple of very quick things. Look at Rashi. Sha'af hein hayu ba'osa hanes. Rashi says, Sha'af al hanoshim gazer haman lahashmid larok oli abed minar vi'ad zakin tapenoshim. So Rashi understands af hinayu ba'osa hanes means that they were part of the decree of destruction. That when Haman wanted to destroy Klal Yisrael, obviously the women were included in that. So they were part of the decree, and therefore they were part of the salvation of the miracle as well. Tosas says something interesting. Tosas, Rabbi say, take a look at Tosas. Sha'af hinayu ba'osa hanes. Very quickly. Perush Rashbam. So Sha'af Perush Rashbam, Sheikar Anes Haya al Yadan. So he quotes Rashbam not on the staff, who says that Halacha Lemaisa, that will say Afina Yuba Osa Hanes means that according to Rashbam, the Rashbam holds that Afina Yuba Osa Hanes means that they were a woman was the architect of salvation, right? Esther Malka was the architect of salvation. So the Gemara says, Al Yidei Esther B'Chanukah, Al Yidei Yehudis, B'Chanukah, Al Yidei Yehudis, B'Pesach, Shebeschos Nashon Tzedekanu Shebe'os Sahadar, Nigalu. V'Kasha, the Lashon She'af Hein, Mashma Shein Tfelos, Uleperusho, Hayalo Lomar, Shehein, Lekach Nira Li, She'af Hein Hayu B'Safek, delashmid larog uli abed. So I just want to point out over here, there is a machlokes as to how to understand the phrase af ein hayu ba'os sahanes. Rashi and Tosas in his svara and in his conclusion indicate af ein hayu ba'os sahanes means they were also subject to the decree of annihilation. And therefore they're obligated in the mitzvah, they're including the decree of annihilation, and therefore including the salvation. The Rashbam says, Af heina yuba osanes means no, that a woman or women were the architects of salvation. They were the architects of salvation by Hanukkah, by Purim, and by Pesach. So just an interesting machlokis here, exactly how to understand that phrase. I will say, I'll just give you another interesting maramakom. The previous Tosas, Nashin Chayavos B'Mikra Megillah, if you notice, by the way, seems to indicate that women have an obligation just like men for Mikra Megillah. If that's the case, then technically speaking, a woman should be able to be motzi a man in Mikra Megillah as well. So just pointing out, it's a fascinating halachic discussion. It's Tosas over here, Nashim Chayavos B'Mikra Megillah. You could even see Mikan Mashma, Shanashim Motzios Es Achirim Yidei Chavasan. Sa'ayin Sham, you'll take a look there. An incredibly fascinating sugya that again is still contemporarily being discussed as well. Good. From Rabbi Shimon Levi says, I'm sorry, I know we should delve more into it, but if we have time at the end of this year, I'll come back to do that Tosas Nashim. But if not, you'll take a look at it. Rabbi Shimon Levi, Purim Shechalios b'Shabbos, when Purim falls out on Shabbos, Sholim Medarshim Binyano Shalyam. Now, we already pointed out that Allah Lamaisa, when Purim, when the 14th of Adar falls out on Shabbos, we advance the Megillah reading to Friday, right? But yet, now we're seeing something different. When Purim falls out on Shabbos, halacha lemaisa sholin v'darshim be'inyano shal chag, which is that halacha lemaisa, we discuss the halachos of Purim on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, okay, my area Purim, the truth is that's not unique to Purim. Afilu Yom Tiv Nami. Rabbi says that's true with any Yom Tiv. The Sanyo, Moshe Tiken and Yisrael Shu Shalom Darshim Yom Shal Yom Hilchos Pesach Pesach Hilchos Atzares Hilchos Chag Bechag. Rabbi say this was one of the takanas of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu paskin, or I should say, he instituted that halacha lemaisa. You should always study the halachos of Yom Tiv on Yom Tiv. So you should study the halachos of Pesach on Pesach, the halachos of Shavuos on Shavuos, the halachos of Sukkos on Sukkos. So Rabbi says, therefore, if Purim falls out on a Shabbos, you should study the halachos of Purim on Shabbos, on Purim. I'll tell you why I would have thought otherwise. It's Shrichale. Mahu detema nigzar mishum diraba kamash malon. But say, I might have thought then, remember, we'll say, already we're not observing Purim on Purim, right? When Purim falls out on Shabbos, not reading the Megillah. Why not? Gezer diraba. What are we concerned about? You may come to carry the Megillah, Dalaram B'Sin. I would have thought, here's the Havamina, I would have thought, therefore, when Purim falls out on Shabbos, we shouldn't even learn Hilchos Purim on Shabbos. Why not? Lest you come to go ahead and carry the Megillah, which is not so crazy. I'm learning Hilchos Purim. Let me learn, right, Hilchos Purim so much as we're going to see. So much of the halachos of Purim are gleaned from the psukim of the Megillah. So I might have thought that therefore halacha lemaisa, I shouldn't even learn the halachos of Purim, lest I come to carry the Megillah. Kamash Malon, no. Kamash Malon, you can't read the Megillah, but you can read the halachas. Beautiful. Rabbi Shimon Levi. Chayiv Adam, we'll say this beautiful Gemara. Chayiv Adam likros es ha-Megillah balayla v'lishnos sabayom. Watch this. A person is obligated to read the Megillah at night and to repeat the Megillah by day. Shene Emar, where do I know this from? So the Gemara says, first of all, take a look at Rashi. Well, actually, not yet. So Shene Emar, Elokai ekra yomam v'lo saneh v'layla v'lo dumiyali. Because the pasuk says, Hashem, I call out to you by day, but I am not answered, and at night I will not be silent. So as I take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Lishno Sabayom, Zecher Lenes. So we go ahead and we read the Megillah, right, at night, and we repeat it by day to remember the miracle. Zecher Lenes Shayuzokin B'Meitzaras and Yom V'Layla. The Jews cried out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for salvation both by day and by night. Now look at Rashi, Ekra, the Mizmor Lamnatzeach Alayelas HaShachar. So I'll just point out over here, the Gemara is quoting from Tehillim Chaf Beis, right? Lamnatzeach Alayelas HaShachar. We're going to see Ayelas HaShachar, the Gemara is going to darshan, is a reference to Esther HaMalka. We'll discuss this. So the Gemara says, That's the very moving kapitel with the phrase Keli Keli Lama Azavtani. That's a reference to Esther Malka. We're going to see this whole beautiful Gemara. Fine. So the Gemara is supposed to. So therefore, again, so I call out to Hakadosh Baruch Hu by day, right? And you don't answer me, and therefore at night I repeat, right? At night I won't be silent. So we'll say Sisi, we are crying out by day and by night. Savar mina. Maybe it means I read the Megillah at night and I learn the halachas, I learn the mishnayos by day. How do you know what it means? It means to read the Megillah. Amr lahu Rabbi Yirmiyah. Lididimi farshli v'nei Rabbi Chia bar Abba kagon darmi inchi. It's like what people say. Evar parsha sada ve'estni. It's like what people say. I'll learn this parsha and then I'll repeat it. Right? So the idea over here is that the pasuk is referring to repeating something. I call out to you by day, you don't answer me, and at night I won't be silent. Just like sometimes people will learn a particular sugya and then they'll repeat the sugya in its entirety. So the Gemara goes weiter. Itmar nami amra bichaba amra ula bira chayiv adam likras Megillah b'aleil v'shlos v'yom. Both say, so same halacha. Person is obligated to read the Megillah at night and to review it or to repeat it by day. Shneimar leman izamercha kavod v'lo yidom. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, I will sing about your praise v'lo yidom, and I will not be silent. Hashem Elokai li olam odeka. Hashem, my God, I will forever give you praise. So we'll say, we're darshaning leman izamercha kavod. I will sing about your kavod v'lo yidom, and I will not be silent, which indicates the Gemara's darshaning, I'll say something twice. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what's happening over here is as follows. Everyone's agreeing that Allah Lamaisi read the Megillah twice, once at night, once by day. Now, what's interesting to point out is as follows. If you take a look at the last Tosas, very quickly, Tosas says, Chayv Adam Likros es HaMegillah b'aleil v'shnos v'yom, Omeri, Diafagav d'mevarich zman b'layla, Chozer u'mevarich oso b'yom. Both say, by the way, if you notice, we do something very interesting by Megillah, which is, we say Shechianu at night, and we say Shechianu by day. Now, it's true. What do we do with the daytime Shechianu? What do we do with the daytime Shechianu? We say it's also on Shalach Manas, Matanos Le'evyonim, Sudas Purim. We tell the Baal Koreh, right? We tell the Baal Koreh, wear something new. So Tosa says it's interesting, but at the end of the day, we'll say, where am I making the Shechianu? Where am I making it? Where am I making it? By Mikra Megillah. So Tosa says they see something very important over here. The Iker Persume Nisa Have Bekriya Diyamama. Ultimately, again, I will say, the Iker Persume Nisa, the Iker publicity of the miracle of Purim is done by day, which makes sense because daytime, easier for people to gather. Therefore, even though we make a Shechianu at night, we make another Shechianu by day because the Iker Persume Nisa is by day. And Tosa says, it's even clear in the pasuk. Because we'll say, what's the first pasuk? The Gemara Darshans, Elokai Ekra Yomam V'lo Sana, Hashem, I'll call out to you by day, you don't answer. V'layla v'lo dumi ali, and at night I won't be silent. What comes first? What comes first in the pasuk? Day and then night. And it's interesting. This is the pasuk the Gemara is using to darshan the obligation to read the Megillah at night and by day. But you see from here that the daytime reading is the Iker. So just interestingly enough, that's it. Tosas also says Iker Su'uda is by day, right? There's no din of Su'uda by night. The daytime of Purim, we're going to see this come up over and over again. The daytime celebration of Purim, both by Megillah as well as by Su'uda, is the Iker Persum Nisa. We'll say, I'll just point out something really beautiful. Rabbi Soloveitchik points out that if you notice, the Gemara is darshaning two very different types of psukim over here, right? Everyone's agreeing on the bottom line, which is that Allah you have to read the Megillah by day and by night. But I will say, look at the difference in the psukim. Remember, again, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying, how do you know you have to read the Megillah by day and by night? Elokai ekra yomam v'lo sana. Hashem, I call out to you by day, you don't answer me. V'layla v'lo dumi ali. But at night I won't be silent. And yet, the second opinion, Ula, l'man yizamercha kavod v'lo yidom. Hashem, I will call out in your covenant and I won't be silent. Both say the first pasuk is a pasuk of pain. Elokai ekra yomam v'lo san. Hashem, I'm calling out to you. Why are you not answering me? If you're not going to answer me, I won't be silent at night either. Second pasuk, joy and jubilation. L'man yizamercha kavod. Hashem, I'm singing out to you. V'lo yidom, and I won't be silent. And the Rav says something so beautiful. He says, that herein lies part of the dynamic of Purim. Right? Purim is the paradigmatic example of an incomplete geula, of a redemption that is laced with so much pain. We're going to see, we don't say Hallel on Purim, right? Which is really strange. So the Gemara says, because you have the Megillah, Kriyasa Zuhilula, the reading of the Megillah is the Hallel. But the real reason that we don't go ahead and say Hallel on Purim is why? Akate Avdi Achashverosh, because Purim is not a complete geula. Purim, right at the end of the Purim story, we're still going ahead and what? We're still going ahead and it's still the servants of Achashverosh. Not only that, but Rabbi Soloveitchik makes such an amazing observation. He says, it's incredible that at the end of the Megillah, right? At the end of the Megillah, everybody's all excited, right? Shoshanas Yaakov, Tzala V'Samecha, great. Everyone's happy. If you think about it, by the way, everybody's happy except for who? Except for the heroine of the story. Right? Esther is locked in a marriage to a man that she does not want to be married to. She's locked in a life that she does not want to be part of. She's locked into circumstances that were not of her own choosing. That this is this dynamic of Purim. It's a bittersweet salvation. The nation is saved. The nation is saved. Individuals are sacrificed. Geula has come, but at the end of the day, the ominous threat of an unpredictable tyrannical ruler still hovers over us. And that's why very much Purim is a very real life celebration, because it's rare in life to have a celebration that's absolute, right? Think about this in just a moment. Rare in life that a person has a simcha where there's absolutely no other problems hovering around. More often in life is Purim. Life is Purim, right? There's beauty, there's wonder, there's celebration, there's excitement, there's simcha, and there's this problem, and there's this challenge, and there's this threat, and there's this difficulty. There's all these different things. Again, I'm trying to stay focused on the positive, but there's all of these incredible difficulties and challenges that are hovering all around me. Life is Purim, and Purim is life. And the Rav says you see this reflected in two different opinions, highlighting two different psukim to give me the obligation to read the Megillah by day and by night. One pasuk, I'm going to keep singing. I'm going to sing at night. I'm going to sing by day. I'm never going to be silent. Joy, jubilation. And a second pasuk, I'm crying out to you for help, and you don't answer me. So because you don't answer me, I'm going to keep on calling out. And it's not a contradiction. They're both highlighting the dialectic of Purim, the two sides of Purim, the joy and jubilation on one hand, but also the difficulty and the sadness and the loss and the sacrifice on the other hand. And they're intertwined one with the other, which is why Purim is, out of all of our Yomim Tovim, is probably the greatest display or the greatest embodiment, the paradigmatic example of the human condition. Let's go back there. Ultimately, again, the kfarim, right? The villages, remember, again, have the ability to advance to the nearest market day or the nearest entry day. Amar Rabbi Chanina, listen to this. Chachamim hekilu ala kfarim lios makdim liyom haknisa kedei sheyispeku mayim umazon la'achim shebekrachim. So we'll say, now listen to this. So remember again, so I'll say there's two things happening over here which I want to bring together. So if you remember again, in the Mishnah, it seemed to be the reason why the villages were permitted to advance their reading to the previous Monday or Thursday was why? Remember Rashi for the Mishnah was why? Because they don't have a minyan and they don't have a Baal Koreh. Then when we get to the Gemara, it seems to be that the reason we're allowing them to go ahead and advance their reading is why? Because we need them to be available to go ahead and provide food, right, to the larger cities on Purim itself. And if the villagers are busy with Megillah and their own mitzvahs by day, they're not going to have the bandwidth to take care of the needs of the larger city. To which the Gemara says, Lamemra, Amud Beis, Lamemra, Ditakanta Dikrachinavu. So we'll say, it sounds like from here, that's what? It sounds like from here, I just do over here. It sounds like from here that halacha l'maisa, the reason we allow the villages to advance their reading is not for the villages, right? Who is it for? For the cities. In other words, we want the villagers. I was about to say the village people, but that doesn't sound right, right? Right? We're about to go ahead and we're telling the villagers that we want you to be free on Purim to provide for the needs of the larger cities. So this is not for the benefit of the villages. This is for the benefit of the cities. So the Gemara said, really? Vatnan, chalios, b'sheni, kfarim, vayaras, karim, bo, bayom. B'Rabba we learned that remember when the 14th falls out on a Monday, what's the halacha? Villages read on that day. V'im isa. Now remember again, if the ability to advance is for the benefit of really the larger cities, so when the 14th falls out on a Monday, when should villages read? When should they read? When should they read, Rabbi? The previous Thursday. V'im isa. No, you can't do that. Why not? Havalu asara. Because Rabbi say if the 14th is a Monday, then the previous Thursday is the 10th. And the 10th, remember again, we saw in the Mishnah that the earliest to read the Megillah is when? On the 11th. So the Gemara says, Sefer will say that's just different. That's just different. You can't advance them. In other words, in that case, where the 14th falls out on Monday, there's nowhere to advance the villages. And again, remember, you're only advancing villages to Mondays or Thursdays, not to previous days. So the Gemara says as follows: Tashma chalios bechamishi. If the 14th falls out on a Thursday, kfarim ba'ayaras kidolas korim bo bayom. Villages and large unwalled cities read on that day. Now, once again, ve'im isa. If it's true that the reason we advance the villages is for the benefit of the larger cities, then what? Liktemu liyom aknisa dachadasarhu. Ultimately, again, advance them to the previous Monday. Right? We'll say if the 14th falls out on Thursday, then Monday is what? Monday's the 11th. It works. Advance them to the previous Monday, and therefore they could take care of the needs of the villages on the 14th, on Thursday. To which the Gemara says, no. We don't go ahead. In other words, we'll say, the way that Chazal set up their takana is, we're happy to advance the villages to the previous Monday or Thursday. But if the 14th already falls out on a Monday or a Thursday, we're leaving it. We're not messing with that. So Tashma, Amr Yehuda, Emasai, B'makom shenichnas b'sheni v'chamishi. Furthermore, again, when do we advance the villages to the nearest Monday or Thursday? That's when it's a village that actually goes into the cities on Mondays and Thursdays. However, but if halacha l'maisa, the particular villages in question, let's say they just don't normally enter into the larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays. In that case, we will not advance their reading, and they'll just read on the 14th like any other unwalled city. But if you think that the reason we advance the villages ultimately is as a benefit to the large unwalled cities, then ultimately mishum de nichnas b'sheni v'chamishi mifsidi l'hu l'krachin. Then just because the villages don't normally enter on Monday and Thursday, why should the larger cities lose out? In other words, they both say, what's bothering the Gemara over here is the way you're framing it is the reason we're advancing the villages is so to benefit the larger cities. This way the villagers are free on Purim itself, and they could take care of the Su'uda needs of the larger cities. Well, if that's the case, who cares if they normally enter into the larger cities Mondays and Thursdays? You should always just advance their reading to the nearest Monday or Thursday so that they are free to take care of the needs of the villagers, of the city dwellers. To which the Gemara says, Ela Ema mipnei shemesapkin mazon mayim umazon achim shebekrachim. Rather, I will say, don't read it as in order to allow, but rather read it as because they do. What does that mean? Because they want to go ahead and see to the needs, the water and the food and drink of those who dwell in the cities. What does this mean? Look at Rashi, second line from the top. Elaima mipnei shemesapkin scharhu lahem v'yeshilshe mesapkin hilchach heicha de'in nichnasin lo kuluhu legabayhu ve'ein kan schar. So the Gemara says like this. No, this takana was made for the benefit of the villages, not for the benefit of the cities. So because it was natural, I guess the system that they're highlighting over is as follows. You have people who dwelled in cities. Now in cities, generally, what don't you have? Right? Produce. You don't have farmland. So cities often relied on surrounding villages for their food. So what would happen? Purim, right? There's a Suda. right? There's a Suda. So what's going to happen? The people in the cities require the villagers to be able to bring food. So Chazal said, for the benefit of the villages, Purim is going to be a busy day for you. It's going to be a busy day. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, what we're going to do is allow you to read Megillah earlier, right? So now the question is, okay, so how do we decide which day to go ahead and allow them to read the Megillah earlier? Well, anyway, Mondays and Thursdays, it was common for them to go into the larger cities, and therefore, again, the villages are permitted to advance their reading to the nearest Monday and Thursday. But the benefit is really to make things a bit easier on the villages. Now, interestingly enough, it also addresses another issue. What's the other issue? That often in villages, they did not have a Baal Koreh, right? And often in villages, maybe they didn't even have a minyan. So you kill two birds with one stone. In other words, you go ahead and you make things easier on the villages, and that therefore Purim, which in general was a busy day because they were seeing to the material needs of the larger cities, you allow them to dispense their obligation on Megillah a little bit earlier on. And coupled with that is the fact that often they didn't have the Baal Koreh or the minyan to be able to go ahead and take care of Mikra Megillah. So therefore we take care of everything in one fell swoop. But I will say, but with limitations. What are the limitations? If the 14th is falling out on a Monday and Thursday, then what? We're not advancing that. We're leaving that as is. Right, we're leaving that as is. And also, for good, we'll leave it like that. So therefore, I will say, it turns out that the takana, it was just a mutually beneficial takana. It benefited everyone, but it was primarily made for the benefit of the villages, in order to make things easier for the villages, not for the benefit of the walled cities, the larger cities. Even though the larger cities, of course, benefited from this as well. Beautiful. Ketzad chalios b'sheni b'Shabbos. Remember again, the Mishnah then went through all of the different cases. Remember, the way, just to point out what the Gemara's focus on over is as follows. The way the Mishnah is set up is the Mishnah first begins with a discussion of dates and then launches into a discussion of days of the week. Right? So the Mishnah begins by saying, Megillah Nikres, B'yud Aleph, B'yud Beis, B'yud Gimel, B'yud Dalet, B'Tesvav. Calendrical dates. Then, when the Mishnah goes through the cases, the Mishnah illustrates them by going through the days of the week. So, Ketzad, Chalios b'Sheni b'Shabbos, right? If the 14th falls out on a Monday. So the Gemara says, Instead of Maishna Reisha Denaket Sidura Diyarcha, or Maishna Seifa Denaket Sidura Diyomi, why is it that the Mishnah began with a discussion of calendrical dates, 11, 12, 13, 14, right, and 15, and why is it that later on in the Mishnah, ultimately, again, we go by the order of the days of the week, right? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Because they both say, remember, if you would have gone by the calendrical dates, you would have had to work backwards in the days of the week. In other words, in order to align, in order to go ahead and illustrate how it turns out, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, you'd have to start on Sunday and work your way back in the week. Therefore, just in order to make it a little bit more comprehensible, the Mishnah wants to work from Monday and on and not from Sunday and back. Beautiful. Chalios B'Erev Shabbos. So remember again, the Mishnah said that what happens if the 14th falls out on Erev Shabbos? What did we say? So the Mishnah said, Chal Lihios Erev Shabbos, Kfarim Aktim Liyom HaKnisa. So remember again, let's play this out. 14th falls out on Friday. So what happens? Villages will read when? Thursday, the 13th, right? And in that case, what will happen when the 14th falls out on Friday? So remember again, unwalled cities and walled cities will read on Friday, right? Because remember again, walled cities can't read on Shabbos, because you can't read the Megillah on Shabbos. And why can't they read on Sunday? Why can't they read on Sunday? It's Friday the 16th. Good. So that's the halacha if it falls on Erev Shabbos. Remember again, villages will advance to Thursday, the 13th, and walled cities and unwalled cities will both read on the 14th on Erev Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Mas Nisin money, who's it paying? Does our Mishnah reflect? I Rebbe Yossi. The truth is, it could be either Rebbe or Rabbi Yossi. So what do we know? My Rebbe, which opinion of Rebbe are you referring to? Here we go. Disanyo, Chalios Erev Shabbos, if the 14th falls out on a Friday, Kfarim, Va'ayoros, Kidolos, Maktim Liyom HaKnisa. Ultimately, again, Kfarim, villages, and Ayoros Gidolos, large cities, advance their reading to Thursday. So most say this is now another opinion, right? This other opinion says that once you go ahead and 14th is falling out on Friday, all unwalled cities, villages and large unwalled cities will advance to Thursday. Umukafin choma korin bo bayom. And walled cities will read on Friday the 14th. So we'll see here what's happening. The 14th is falling out on Friday. So this opinion is saying, Tanakama is saying, this opinion is saying, all unwalled cities advance to the 13th, Thursday. Walled cities will read on the 14th, that Friday. Rabbi says no. Rabbi Omer Ani, lo yitchu ayaros mimkoma. No, what are you talking about? Why should unwalled cities move from Friday the 14th? They should read on Friday the 14th. Ella, elu v'elu korim bo bayom. Rather, Rabbi will say, I'm fine with moving the villages towards Thursday. That makes sense. But both walled cities and unwalled cities will read on Friday the 14th. So Rabbi will say, fundamental machlokes between the Tanakama and Rebbe when the 14th falls out on Friday. Let's start with Rebbe. Rebbe says 14th falls out on Friday, leave unwalled cities on Friday. That's their natural day. Who do we have to adjust? Villages will go to Thursday the 13th, and walled cities will read when? Together with unwalled cities on the 14th. Tanakama says no. Tanakama says when it's Friday the 14th, unwalled cities and villages, all unwalled cities go back to the 13th, and walled cities will read on Friday the 14th. So the Gemara says, well, what's going on over here? My time in Tanakama. So we'll say, what's the logic over here? Why does the Tanakama hold that all unwalled cities are pushed back to the 14th? Here we go. D'chsiv b'chol shana v'shana. Because we both say the Megillah says that we have to observe Purim b'chol shana v'shana every year. What does this mean? Ma kol shana v'shana ayaros called Muslim mukafin. We both say, just like in a regular year, unwalled cities always celebrate Purim before walled cities. Afkan ayaros called Muslim mukafin. So too over here, unwalled cities have to celebrate before walled cities. And therefore, I will say, when it's Friday the 14th, we're going to push back all unwalled cities to what? To Thursday the 13th. Walled cities will celebrate on the 14th. And this way you have unwalled cities celebrating before walled cities. Afkan lo yitchayaras mimkoman. But why don't you make another argument? Why don't you say, just like every other year, right? Unwalled cities should read on the 14th, and they should not be moved from their place. So too over here, unwalled cities should remain on Friday the 14th, to which the Gemara says, Shani achad lo efshar. No, it's different over here because there's no other option. In other words, Rabbi say, the Tanakama holds that the structure of Purim is that unwalled cities always read before walled cities. And that's their immutable structure. And therefore, when the 14th falls out on Friday, therefore we know by definition we have to move back the walled cities to Friday. By definition, that requires us to move the unwalled cities to Thursday the 13th. For Rebbe, my time, what's Rebbe's logic? He says like this: B'chol shana v'shana. But let's say he dashes the same thing each and every year. Ma kol shana v'shana ein ayaros nidchim imkoman. Just like in a regular year, we allow unwalled cities to what? Read on the 14th. Afkan lo yitcha yaros b'mkoman. So too unwalled cities read on the 14th. Leave them alone. I will say, just because you have to move the walled cities, why do you have to tinker? Why do you have to tamper with the unwalled cities? Ve'ima b'chol shana v'shana. Why don't you make a different drasha? Ma kol shana v'shana yaros called Muslim mukafin. Just like on a regular year, walled cities come before just like in a regular year, unwalled cities read before walled cities. Afkan nami ayaros komel mukafin. So too, why don't we say that we should move all unwalled cities to Thursday the 13th in order that they could precede walled cities? Shani hachad lo efshar. It's different over here. It's different over here because there's no other option. So I will say, what you see over here is as follows. Interestingly enough, they're making the same drasha, b'chol shana v'shana, which tells us Purim follows a pattern. The machlokes is which is the primary part of the pattern. See, according to the Tanakama, the primary part of the pattern is what? Unwalled cities always read before walled cities. That's the primary part of the pattern. And therefore, once you have to move walled cities to the 14th, because the 15th is Shabbos, by definition, you have to move unwalled cities to the 13th to Thursday. Rabbi will say, no, the primary part of the pattern is what? That unwalled cities read on the 14th, right? Because we'll say, the majority of cities are unwalled cities. So therefore, again, the primary part of the Purim pattern is unwalled cities read on the 14th. Leave it alone. So just because you have to move walled cities now to Friday the 14th, don't tamper with the unwalled cities. Incredible. My Rabbi Yossi, what's the position of Rabbi Yossi? This Sanya, Chalios, Erev Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi was like this. There when Purim falls out, when the 14th falls out in Erev Shabbos, Mukafin ukfarim makdim maknisa. So we'll say, watch this. Listen to this opinion. In this case, where Purim the 14th of Adar falls out on Friday, Mukafin, walled cities and villages are moved to Thursday. Right? Isn't this wild? So we'll say, according to this opinion, well, anyway, once you have to move walled cities because they can't read on Shabbos anyway, you might as well move them to another pre-established date. Move them to Thursday. The ayaros gidolos korim bo bayom. And ultimately, again, large unwalled cities will ultimately read on Friday the 14th. Rabbi Yossi says, no, ein mukafin kol min la'ayaros, ela elu v'elu korim bo bayom. Rabbi Yossi will say, no, we don't move walled cities before unwalled cities. Rather, again, halacha lamaisa, everyone will read on Friday, with the exception of the villages who will read on Thursday. We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with the position of Rabbi Yossi in Mirat Session tomorrow. Shkar Chabosei.